Hi everyone, hope all of you are doing well. In this video, I'll be giving you some information on how to plan your business analysis governance. And this information is taken from the BABOK, so without any delay, let's get into it. So, all of us might have been, as business analysts, been in the situation where we had confusions like who is supposed to be deciding on certain requirements, how the changes come in, who actually has the privilege to raise a change request, and who would be deciding on whether we should be taking up that change, prioritization, who's approving our documents, and so on. So much of confusion and chaos, but it's very important that we have a governance plan to control all these different areas. So, the purpose of creating the business analysis governance plan is to define how decisions are going to be made about requirements and designs, including the reviews, the change control processes, approvals, and prioritization. So, when business analysts are putting down this plan, you need to be identifying how business analyst work will be approached and prioritized. What would be the process for someone raising a change to a business analyst information? So, if they have certain concerns or they give you feedbacks about any business analysis information, documentation, etc., then how is the change going to be raised? And then who has the authority and responsibility to propose changes? And who should be involved in these change discussions? Sometimes too many people in that particular change discussion could lead to nowhere, no decisions being made, and it's just too many cooks spoiling the dish. So that's the reason why we need to define it. And who has responsibility for analyzing change requests? Who has the authority to approve changes? And finally, how changes would be documented and communicated. So all this is very important because when you make changes, there's going to be a lot of impacts, and in the end, you need to know who raised changes, who made approvals, who did the analysis, etc. So that's the reason why governance is very important. And if you see the entire flow of this is, you first, as an input to planning your business analysis governance, is you need to have the business analysis approach as well as the stakeholder approach. Then, along with certain guidelines and tools like the business analysis performance assessment, business policies, current state description, legal or regulatory information, you can plan out your business analysis governance. And finally, the output of this activity you're performing is going to be the analysis governance approach. And this governance approach would be very helpful when you're working on tasks such as planning business analysis information management, and then how you're going to prioritize requirements, times when you need to assess the requirement changes, you can use it, as well as when you need to get approvals for certain requirements, you can always look up at the governance approach. So now let's get to see all this in detail. The first one is inputs. So the business analysis approach is one input that you should consider, where incorporating the overall business analysis approach in the governance approach is very necessary to have and ensure consistency across the approaches. So your governance and your business analysis entire approach, all this needs to be well aligned. If there is any mismatch in activities, then probably it's not the right approach, or there might be some confusions. If you want to know how to plan your business analysis approach, I've taken a separate video and I'll put it up in the description box. The next one is stakeholder engagement approach. So here also you need to identify the stakeholders and understanding their communications and collaboration needs. It's very useful to determine their participation in the governance approach. Okay, whatever styles, techniques, methods work for stakeholders, you need to incorporate them into governance because they need to be part of governance as well. So you need to always look up at that in order to plan your governance. The next one is, there are certain elements that you need to be considering when you're putting down the governance plan. The first one is decision making. So a stakeholder may serve in various roles in decision making, okay? There might be different stakeholders, but it doesn't mean all stakeholders will have a say. It doesn't mean all stakeholders need to be approving it. No, there can be different roles that they play. Some stakeholders might be just participants in the decision making discussions. Some might act as SMEs, subject matter experts, lending only their experience and knowledge to the decision making process, but they may not be actually the decision makers. The next one person could play a role of the reviewer of information, review everything. And finally, there could be someone who is the approver or decision maker. So you need to identify what role each stakeholder plays so that you would be able to take the right set of actions. The next one is the change control process. So you need to understand, in order for change coming in, what's going to be the process. So when planning for this, you need to consider and determine the process for requesting changes. What needs to be followed when a change needs to be requested? Then you need to determine the elements of the change request. People just can't come and say, like, we need this change to be brought about. They need to give a description and information about what exactly that change is. So the elements could be a description of the change, the cost it's going to take, the time that it's going to be, estimated to for that change to be done. What are the benefits of implementing that change? If there are any risks involved in bringing that change, whether when implementing the change, if there are any risks, or by not implementing the change, if there's going to be any risks faced, you need to bring that up. Priority of that change which is requested, and what are the course of actions in order to perform that change. What could be the course of actions, or what could be the other alternate course of actions that can be performed in um, alternate to this particular change. So all this needs to be given so that a person who needs to take a decision of prioritizing the change or approving whether this change can be implemented, it would be helpful for them. The next one is you need to determine how changes will be prioritized, and then how changes will be documented, then how changes will be communicated to people, and then who would be performing the impact analysis of that change, and finally you need to determine who will authorize changes. Okay, so when you have this in place, you can understand by now that whenever a change is raised, you would know exactly what to do. You won't be, in that fuzzy situation of what do I do now. Okay, the next one is to plan prioritization approach. This is another important, phase to concentrate on, because requirements come in, you have loads of requirements, and how do you even prioritize them? So there are certain things you need to consider. The first one is the formality and rigor of the prioritization process. How formal do we need to, perform these prioritizations, and what would be the rigor of it? The next one is participants who would be involved in prioritization. Again, too many people shouldn't be spoiling and deviating from prioritization. You need to get the right people who would exactly be involved in prioritization. The next one is you need to understand the process for deciding how prioritization will occur, including which prioritization techniques would be utilized. Okay, so some organizations would say that, okay, if the prioritization is given from a person who's of a higher role or designation, then that's supposed to be taken. But sometimes it's not just by one person saying this is the priority, go ahead and work on it. There would be different collaborative prioritization techniques that you can use in order to come up with prioritization. So you need to define how prioritization would go ahead. And the last one is what would be the criteria for prioritization. It could be different criteria. You need to specify if it's going to be on urgency, is it going to be based on time, is it going to be based on cost, is it going to be based on effort, or it's going to be based on risk. Different criteria could be involved. You need to mention what would be criteria that would be taken into account to prioritize requirements. Next one is planning for approvals. Again, we most of the time we want to get consensus and approvals from everyone, every stakeholder. But again, when you want to determine who is going to be the right person to approve, you need to think about what are the requirements and designs that need to be approved. Not everything you have to keep going on, say, please approve this. There are certain times where you need to set the boundary as to where within which your limit you can take a decision, and with which limit does, if it exceeds, you need to get decisions approvals from other people. Okay, then you need to check on the timing for approvals. When do approvals occur? Whether it's going to be at the start of an iteration, or it's going to be well ahead of the iterations, or it's going to be at the start of even implementation or getting a sign off. There are different timings in which approvals take place. For certain things, there are different timings, certain activities. So you need to define that. The next one is a process to follow to gain approvals. Another thing that you need to think about, because to gain approvals again could be a real chaos. And if you have a process in place, you would know exactly if this is the approval I need, go to this person, follow this process, things like that. And finally, who will approve the requirements and design? So if you know the right person, you can directly go rather than running around getting people and then they say no, I can't do it, and wasting time. That's very important. And as I said, there are certain guidelines and tools that can help you to plan out this governance plan. So the first one is business analyst performance assessment, which we are very well know. We know it provides results of previous assessments that should be reviewed and incorporated into planning approaches. So previously, you need to connect with your core peers, your business analysts, and see what worked well for them. Things that worked well, take into consideration, try to implement it in your project as well, instead of doing trial and errors and again wasting time. The next one is you need to understand if there are certain business policies in place which would define the limits within which decisions can be made. So I said, so depending on the role sometimes people play, they can take a certain set of decisions or not more than that. So you need to understand what are the different ways. So I gave you an example, but there can be various policies in place, regulations, contracts, agreements, warranties. Certain people need to be certified people in order to take decisions, or they need to be certain people, legal people. So you need to understand all these things and understand who would be the right person or how decisions need to be made. The next one is the current state description. So it provides a context within which work needs to be completed. Sometimes, most of the time, people really go out of scope and just wasting time and effort and money. So you always need to understand within what's the scope within which things need to be get done, decisions need to be made. And this information would be really important for you to limit the scope within which decisions can be made and better decisions can be made as well. And the final one is legal or any regulatory information. So sometimes there could be legislative rules, regulations that should be followed. And when you understand all these frameworks, this would enable you to ensure that all business decisions which are made are more sound and standard. Okay, because sometimes if you really fail to look into regulatory legal information, you might come to a point where you have to redo your work or you need to put in more effort, changes need to be made. So it's always good in order to take these elements and guidelines and tools into consideration when planning your governance. And the output of this entire activity would be is that the business analyst would identify the stakeholders who would have the responsibility, authorities who would be making decisions about business analyst work, who would be responsible for setting priorities, and then who will approve changes to business analyst information, and the process that would be utilized to manage requirements and design changes. So this would really be helpful for you as a business analyst when things of these sort comes in place. So I hope that you got information on how you plan business analyst governance. If you like this video, please do give this a thumbs up. If you haven't subscribed, please do subscribe to this channel and also do share your feedbacks. Thank you.